After I was brought on board with Duncan in January 1940, in September 1940, a very successful test was conducted at the Brooklyn Navy Yard using a small Navy ship, a tender, if you will, about 350 tons, which was dockside but in deep water. And some of the equipment was on board the ship, mostly the coils and antenna system, and all the heavy hardware was not on board that ship. It was on the dock and ran through cables to the various elements involved in the ship. So it turned on, the ship became totally invisible optically. Nobody was on board the ship. Everybody was removed for safety. And they were concerned that something might go wrong with this test. They wanted it on long cables so that if they had to, they could cut the cables, and if it was important enough, they'd sink the ship. No such precaution was actually required, though they took those precautions, and of course there was no problem. Everything worked according to plan. The ship was invisible. Nobody was on board, which was very important because of later results with further tests at a later date. So at this point, Roosevelt was elated, the Navy was elated, who was funding this project. It was immediately classified. With this completed test, it's only actually the first phase of continuing work. At that point, the Navy classified it. And, of course, everybody else had to get clearances that was working with this project, and our offices were opened in a special building on the Philadelphia Navy Yard. The project was moved there, as I stated, and, of course, we had to move back and forth. The theoretical work continued on at the Institute, and it was sort of a case of the theory was at the Institute, and the work in terms of hardware was at the Philadelphia Navy Yard. The next thing that happened was that Roosevelt, being elated over this, says to Nicola Tesla, who was the director, if you can make a larger ship invisible, you can make anything invisible. I'm going to give you a real ship now, a battleship. Now here we're going from a ship of some 350 tons with relatively low power to produce a field of invisibility to a battleship of some 30,000 tons. Now it was moved into the back section of the Navy Yard at Philadelphia, and the work proceeded from that point on for quite a period of time, actually until 1941, which is when it occurred that it was moved in there, until sometime in 42. I need to fill in some other things in the background here in terms of myself and Duncan. While we were there at the Institute, of course, we were living off the grounds of the Institute itself. We had our own little residence. And of course, being young men in the Navy, we were running around town and we were dating and doing all this sort of things. And there's certain things turned up at a later date regarding, let's say, our social life. There's a strange series of events I want to get into, but this will be just a little bit further down the line. In the period in which all of this work was done, we were not, of course, privy to the earliest work. But we were brought up to speed. We were told what had happened. And Tesla, of course, became rather friendly. He was a very quiet and, shall we say, withdrawn man. And the history of Nicola Tesla is very interesting, and one has to understand something of his past and what he went through to understand how he wound up where he did and why he had the personality and character which was known to him at that time, but to his friends, which were rather few. He was born in 1863 in Smiljan, Croatia, now part of Yugoslavia, and he was the younger son of a priest. A priest, of course, had a wife, and there was an older son, a brother. Tesla was born in 1863. The other son, the firstborn, was 3 years older. He grew up in this family in rather poor circumstances. But they did learn how to ride because that was a transportation at that time. But his brother, at the age of 10, had a horse accident, which he fell off the horse, broke his neck, and died. This apparently broke up Tesla very badly because he was very close to his brother for whatever reason. They had that very close feeling of relationship. Quite possibly he never got over it. As time went on, father was trying to groom Nicola for the priesthood. And Nicola couldn't have cared less. He wanted to go to engineering school. Of course, he went through the normal schools of the time, And at the age appropriate to joining the schools, the more advanced schools, he went through the secondary schools. But then he finally, after long arguments with his father, who said, absolutely no, you will not go to engineering school, you're going to become a priest, Tesla became very ill. Whether it was a feigned illness or whether it was a genuine illness, psychologically induced, history does not record. He became very ill. His father thought he might be dying like the older son. He finally relented and says, all right, Nicola, you can go to engineering school. Nicola miraculously recovered. And, of course, when the time was appropriate, he went to engineering school. He went for 1 year. And in 1879, his father died. And, of course, therein the funds were cut off. He could not continue on in school formally. So he went to work, first in the telephone system works around in Bucharest, I believe. Tried to continue his schooling on the side, as the saying goes, monitoring the classes without being a matriculated student, being the normal tuition. Considered very brilliant by his parents, not only his parents, but most particularly by his professors. And then in 1882, he went to Paris, went to work for the Edison Works in Paris. He was there until 1884. During this entire period of time, he had argument after argument with his professors because he was, at that point, even so brilliant that he envisioned new forms of electricity. DC, of course, was the common thing at that time, developed by Thomas Alva Edison. And, of course, Edison's works were all over the world at that time, and they had a major installation in Paris, which he went to work with. And the head of the engineering works in Paris considered Tesla very brilliant. Tesla decided he wanted to come to the United States in 1884 for greener pastures, if you will. And he got a letter of introduction from the works manager in Paris to Thomas Alva Edison at Menlo Park, New Jersey. So he bid his farewells and got on, went to England and, of course, got on one of the regular steamboat trips and didn't have much money. Someplace along the way, he lost a suitcase of clothes. The only thing he managed to keep and to survive on his trip was a book of poetry he liked, the letter of introduction to Edison, and literally 4 cents in his pocket.